It gives me great pleasure at this time to call upon the Honorable Louis Joseph Freeh to deliver the commencement address.
Thank you very much, and I'm very, very honored to be here, particularly to be, Father Jonathan, your last, I think, degreed awardee. So I'm particularly pleased and honored, and my deep and sincere congratulations to the graduating class. Realize I'm the last thing standing between you and your graduation, so I'm very mindful of that. Thank you very much for the honor of giving you the last thoughts, not a lecture, but the last few thoughts. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. As you can see, I haven't been able to hold a steady job in 63 years. You'll do much better in a series of different commitments and engagements. I feel particularly connected to your wonderful institution. The Benedictines who actually founded this school came from Newark, New Jersey, which is my hometown. And over the years, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, with which I've had most of my connection, has had 64 graduates, including one today who's the son of one of those agents. And really over 1,000 law enforcement officers have come from your campus over the last years, which is an astounding number, but also a great compliment to your values, to your culture, both your Catholic values and your American values. So it's very, very terrific. I want to congratulate and thank the parents. The parents get special recognition, as we know on these days, because sociologists have told us that most of the important values that children learn, they learn from their parents between 2 and 3.5 years old. The notions of not lying and not stealing and not cheating, they come from your parents who love you and are so particularly proud of you today. They're reinforced over the years by educators, by institutions, sometimes by law enforcement, but they're values that come from your parents. So your parents today deserve a lot of recognition. It reminds me of a story when I was being nominated as FBI director. My wife and I had the conversation, I'm sure many parents have, and the question was, should we bring the 4 young boys to the ceremony tomorrow in the White House? And of course, the answer was yes, we should bring them. So I was standing in the Oval Office with the President of the United States right before the ceremony, and I noticed a slight shift of field in the Rose Garden. Instinctively knew it had to be one of my 4 active young boys. But I hadn't been nominated yet, so I didn't want to say anything. We go out, the President comes up to the podium, and I notice my 2-year-old is completely wet. Completely wet. And the 4-year-old is even more wet. Now there's a pond in the middle of the Rose Garden. If you go there for a ceremony, just be careful as you walk and maneuver around it. So what had happened is the 4-year-old is standing next to the pond, right? You can see the picture. The 2-year-old sees his opportunity. And Chris, you have 6 brothers, so you know how it works. The 2-year-old comes up and pushes him into the pond, creating complete protocol chaos and dysfunction. So I come out to the podium, I look at my wife, and she looks at me saying, I told you not to bring the 4 young boys to the ceremony today. Anyway, the President thinks this is amusing, right? So he said, I'd like to speak to the pusher, the one that pushes them in, 2 years old. So they bring the 2-year-old in front of the President of the United States, Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States, a lawyer, very tall, imposing man, and he asks one relevant, non-leading question. Did you push your brother into the pond? Before that, he asked them, do you know who I am? To which my son said, no. And to the second question, did you push your brother in the pond? He looks up to the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States and says, no. Now, as a lawyer, I was kind of proud of him. On the other hand, I'd just been nominated to be the head of the FBI. So what I wanted to share with you today were just a few thoughts and a few brief thoughts. And they really go to the core values and the core principles that have governed your lives, which you received from your parents, which are reinforced by this wonderful institution, and which you will carry forward and develop and pass on to your children and to your families and to the communities and places that you serve. It's a very interesting historical intersection this week. May is the traditional month where we honor law enforcement officers. We had ceremonies all week in Washington honoring the law enforcement officers who've been killed in the line of duty. One at MIT, as you know, almost a month ago. Today is also Armed Services Day. So you have this unique intersection today of the men and women who protect your safety and your liberty. It's also the anniversary of the final suppression by the Nazis of the uprising at the Warsaw Ghetto in 1943. 30 days of incredible historic resistance by men and women and children who wanted their liberty, who wanted their freedom. Your freedom, your liberty, your safety is a gift. It's a gift that we all receive by living in the land of the free and the home of the brave. And in our Constitution, written by our framers, very imperfect men, some of them were slaveholders who signed the Constitution of the United States. But remember, in the Constitution and in the Independence Declaration, the goal was to form a more perfect union. You know, your goal and your charge going forward is to form and help this great country be a more perfect union. And we have lots of imperfections. You can't pick up a newspaper today without getting a little discouraged, a little depressed. The corruption cases going on in New York City, you know, you need a box score to keep track the number of state elected legislatures who are being arrested, to the point where people are starting to fear whether a quorum can still be maintained at a certain point. This is very discouraging. It's very discouraging for someone. At my point, it's got to be discouraging for some of you. The favorability rating for our elected federal officials, you may know, in the recent Gallup poll, fluctuates between 8 and 12%. You know, if you ran a lemonade stand and your favorable rating was 12%, you'd close up. You wouldn't be able to operate. There are lots of reasons to be discouraged, to be starting your careers, whether they be in public service or private service, and really ask the question, you know, what is going on and where are we coming from and where are we going? You look at the series of economic crimes, the Wall Street insider trading cases, the corruption and scandals in our athletic departments, in our church, in our religious organizations, in our schools. The cheating scandals, we're not talking about the students, we're talking about the administrators and the superintendents. Cheating, changing records, so the school appears to be doing better than it really is. And I guess my core message to you today is that you are our future and you are our hope. You are the ones that have to make sure that we keep forming a more perfect union, and that the constitutional right to life and liberty, which you have protected and guarded, not only by the men and women some of here today you see in uniforms, are representatives from the Boston Joint Terrorism Task Force, but you also have the right to happiness, the pursuit of happiness, which is written in our Constitution. Interestingly, that's the right that you have to pursue and develop. The right to protection, the right to life. Not perfect at all these days. That's provided to you, but the pursuit of happiness is what you need to do. And how do you do that? You do it in different ways. It doesn't mean that you have to be in public service. You can be a teacher, you can be a coach, you can be a worker, you can be anything and everything that you want to be and can be. Your potential is enormous. The potential sitting here in front of us, about to get these degrees, is enormous. I don't think you could quantify it even if you were a physics professor. You have the ability to pursue your happiness. And there's lots of different ways to do that, but there's some principles. There's some first principles and lessons that people have learned over the years that will help you, not guarantee you, but will help you pursue happiness. And it means different things to different peoples. One of them is you've got to give back. You've got to have some belief and notion of returning the gifts that you have as Americans, as the sons and daughters of the people who are filling this plaza here, your teachers, your faculty. You have to be willing and understand that it's important that you give back, or the union never advances. It certainly never becomes perfected. You've got to keep your word. Keeping your word is important. That's one of those lessons that you learned when you were 3 or 4 years old. A wonderful story about General Grant, not really very well known. When he took General Lee's surrender at Appomattox, the end of a horrific, ferocious war, he made a command decision, as they would call it in Washington today, and allowed Lee and the Confederate soldiers who surrendered to keep their sidearms and their horses because they were going back to their farms. They were beaten, defeated. When he got back to Washington, by the time he got back to Washington, you remember President Lincoln had been assassinated. President Johnson was now in charge of the United States. Johnson ordered the indictment of General Robert E. Lee for treason. An indictment was actually returned in the Eastern District of Virginia and lodged in the federal court. And there was a huge anger in the country, particularly after the assassination of a beloved president who had literally saved the Union, who called America, by the way, the last best chance for Earth. And it is still today the last best chance for Earth. Anyway, the story goes like this. President summons Grant, and Grant said, "You can't indict General Lee for treason." And Johnson, who was a stereotypical politician, says, "Well, why not?" And he said, "Well, I gave him my word. I gave him my word at Appomattox that if he surrendered, he and his soldiers would return home unmolested as long as they obeyed the law and the Constitution of the United States." And the President of the United States said, "It doesn't matter. I'm the President." And Grant threatened to resign. He said, "Sir, I will resign my commission," which forced Johnson, who was also a very practical politician, Grant was the most popular general in the United States, to reverse his position. But it was one of those acts of moral courage, one of those rare, quiet moments of greatness. And you'll have those in your lives. They'll sneak up on you sometimes, they'll surprise you, but you will have those rare moments. Maybe you'll only have one, but a moment of greatness where you can exercise that moral courage, all the principles that we sum up and culminate today in your graduation. And the reverse is true. The reverse is true, unfortunately, and we see examples of it all over the place. There was a guy named Avery Brundage. Many of you may not have heard of his name. Avery Brundage was the U.S. Olympic coach in 1936 when the U.S. Olympic teams went to Berlin, Germany. And if you remember, the Nazis used the Olympics as a powerful propaganda platform. Avery Brundage was one of the most distinguished Americans and probably the most distinguished athletic coach in the United States of America. The first thing he did when he got to Berlin, he gave an interview to the Nazi radio network saying he had seen no evidence of anti-Semitism anywhere in Germany. Then it came time to run the 400-meter race. The two athletes who had qualified and were ready to run the race were named Stoller and Glickman, two Jews. At the last moment before the race, and this was a famous Olympics, remember Jesse Owens, won the 4 Olympic gold medals. At the last moment, Brundage pulled those 2 athletes from the competition because he didn't want to run Jews in the 1936 Nazi Olympics. And that's the reverse of Ulysses S. Grant. It's the opportunity that you have, and you may only have one, to exercise, that quality of moral courage, judgment, bravery, fidelity, integrity, which is the FBI motto, by the way, to do something of that importance. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Nobody in Washington, by the way, that you hear of a lot. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to try something and fail. Failure is okay. You learn more from your failures than you do a lot of times from your successes. Don't be afraid to say no. Whether you're working as a government clerk or whether you're working for some very high-powered financial institution or corporation, don't be afraid to say no. Be loyal to your principles, your core principles. As Thomas Jefferson said, in matters of style, swim with the current. But in matters of integrity and principle, set like a rock. Stay like a rock. Very, very important. And don't be afraid to help others. Advantaging someone else, you'll find in life, does not disadvantage you. We're afraid sometimes that our young professionals in highly competitive environments, and you are entering, by the way, no surprise, one of the most highly competitive job environments, economic environments in several generations. That does not mean that every one of you will not be a great success in what you choose to do. And that should be, by the way, something that makes you happy, because that's the pursuit of happiness that only you can control. But disadvantaging someone who's competing with you usually doesn't help you in the end. Helping other people is generally the formula and the recipe for strengthening, your goals, achieving your mission, getting what you want out of life. So this is a wonderful day. I just want to conclude by congratulating you all, telling you how very, very proud we are, and how your teachers, your parents, all of those who have contributed to this day share immensely in your joy. And we wish you every good luck, every happiness, and success. Godspeed.